July. Say hello, everyone. Do they want what? Doing it out.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait another minute for everyone to connect to their audio, and then we'll get started. GPAC members, please remember to put GPAC in front of your name so that you are at the top of our, or together on our list on the participants, and then we will start momentarily.
I think the GPAC members already have that. I put in their names.
Yeah, the GPAC members should already have that.
Okay. All right. Michael, should we start?
Yes, we can start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 14th General Plan Advisory Committee meeting. I'm Matt Ramey with Ramey Associates. We're the lead consultant on the general plan, and tonight I will be presenting and facilitating the meeting. Before we jump in and get into the content, I would like to, we have simultaneous interpretation, and so if we could have an announcement in Spanish for how to get to that room, that would be appreciated. So Anna or Lourdes? Michael, I don't hear anything.
I'm not hearing them either. Anna or Lourdes, can you switch to the English channel and announce the translation? There we go.
Okay, I still am not hearing anything.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to roll? Okay, good.
Yes.
And apologies to folks, I'm on my phone, so I hear different things on than if I were using my computer. So we are, good evening, everyone. As I said, welcome to the 14th meeting of the GPAC. The purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of the feedback we received on the land use alternatives. It's great to have so many folks here this evening to hear and discuss the results. I am going to share my screen and we are going to jump right into the presentation. There's a lot of information to cover and we want to make sure that there's enough time for conversation and feedback. At the last GPAC meeting on February 2nd, it was a joint GPAC and GPAC meeting and community workshop, and there wasn't as much time for the GPAC to have a discussion. And so what we'd really like to do tonight is for the GPAC to share their ideas and thoughts, and then after that, we will do public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Hope everyone can see my screen here. All right. So as I said, the objectives of our meeting tonight are to give a summary of the engagement activities that have occurred since February 2nd, to go over some of the frequently asked questions that happened during our engagement process over the last 6 weeks, to present a summary of the preliminary survey results, for the GPAC to discuss the key takeaways from the survey, for us to outline some of the next steps in the process, since that was one of the questions that was asked at multiple engagement efforts. And then at the very end of the meeting, there will be a period of time for public comment. Let me start with the recent community engagement activities that we did and how we got up to where we are today. So this is a graphic that I know many of you have seen before, and this is the 5-step process for the general plan update. We're right here in the middle at policy development and plan alternatives, which is we are working on now and will go through into the summer of 2021. From there, we're going to go into the development of the plan and then review and adoption of the plan. We definitely got some comments previously about whether the briefing book was actually the general plan, and it is not. It is really just merely the summary of the land use alternatives. Up until this point, we have done a significant amount of community engagement, and this was one of the other questions that was asked during the engagement process. So we started the process in 2019, and since then, there has been a lot of activity in the community. We know that some people didn't hear about the process until more recently with the land use alternatives, but I think it is worthwhile to go through some of the work that we did for how we did outreach and engagement with the community. At the beginning of the process, there was a citywide mailing in the utility bills. So every property owner, every resident in the city received an announcement that the general plan was starting and asking folks to participate in the process. The city staff and the consultant team sent emails and made phone calls to organizations and neighborhood groups based on the list that the city had. The Acorn newspaper has been closely following this process, and to date, there have been 29 articles in the Acorn about the general plan, starting with the scoping process and the City Council's review of the contract, and then moving all the way through into the land use alternatives. This advisory committee has met 14 times. This is the 14th meeting. There's 25 to 50 plus people at each of the meetings. We've had 2 public workshops, one in the fall of 2019, and then the other just last month that had 125 and 250 people. We also had 2 community forums. We've done pop-up workshops when we could do them out in the community. We had 11 of those pop-up workshops where we went to different locations in the community and spoke with over 1,000 people. We've had focus groups and stakeholder interviews, and we've had 3 online surveys with over 3,000 people participating in the process. There has also been a statistically valid survey that the city undertook a year ago, which included some questions on the general plan that over 600 people participated in. And then there's been a social media campaign that has had hundreds of posts over the last year and a half. So we have been doing our best to blanket the community with information. And we know that not everyone is going to have heard about the process, but we do feel that that we have spent a lot of time trying to get the word out on the process.
Electricity, fire.
The land use alternative engagement activities really started with, we actually started over a year ago with this, thinking about where, how the city could change and how it could stay the same. This culminated into in a meeting, the GPAC number 13 on February 2nd. There were over 250 people at that meeting. And at that process, we also released the briefing book as well as the online survey. After that occurred, we had 4 two-hour-long open houses or listening sessions where we were available to answer questions with the community members, and a lot of people participated in that process. We understand that the land use alternatives can be complex, and there's a lot of information. It's pretty thick, so we wanted to make sure that people understood what was in the briefing book so that they could effectively answer the survey. In addition, between early February and the middle of March 15th, when the survey closed, The city and the consultant team met with, did 25 separate presentations to organizations, community groups, residents, business owners, homeowners associations, and others. And so as many of you know who participated in this, Michael, Kristen, Ian, Melissa, I, and others from the city were out quite a bit in the evenings virtually with the community, talking about the land use alternatives, trying to answer questions, and make sure that everyone had full knowledge about the process. There was also, in addition to those meetings, there was also a lot of outreach that occurred. There were ads in the Acorn and the BC Star, and there were newspaper articles about the process. There were posts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. There was updated information on the project website. There was a series of email campaigns where we sent emails out to the database. City staff distributed over 2,500 hard copy flyers and 200 surveys to members of the community who wanted them. And there were email blasts on multiple occasions to community organizations, charities, service organizations in the community trying to get people to take the survey. The result was actually a pretty large number of people who participated in the process. The Land Use Alternative Survey was open from February 2nd until March 15th. It was supposed to close on March 1st, but because there was so much interest and so much demand for the survey, we kept it open for another 2 weeks. We ended up with over 2,100 individual surveys submitted. We have over 6,000 individual comments in the survey itself. And then we also had the briefing book, which is the document summarizing the alternatives. We had that online, and we allowed people to make comments in the briefing book and on the maps, and we received over 1,000 comments there. So needless to say, there's been a huge amount of interest, not surprisingly, in this topic in the city. We have a huge amount of information that we are going through. We are not all the way through it at this point because of the large number of responses and the large number of surveys that were submitted back to us. Overall, this number is very high for a survey like this. Typically, the statistically valid survey that happened a year ago, I believe, had about 670 people who took it to make it statistically valid. And so we ended up with 3 times that number of 2,100 completed surveys, completed submissions, 6,000 comments. So there's a lot of information to go through. People are clearly really passionate about the city and about the direction that the city is going to go, and this is reflected in the volume of comments. We also, in the process and in talking with many of you, and I see a lot of familiar names here on the call this evening, there were questions about the process and about the alternatives and about land use, and there was, definitely, some confusion about some things and some information that needed to be clarified. I'd like to refer you all to the project website, toaks2045.org, and there is a tab on the website and information for frequently asked questions. So there's a lot of information there that reflects some of the questions that we heard throughout the process that we wanted to provide additional details and information on. I'm just going to give a quick summary at this point of some of those questions as we lead into the survey results. So one of the questions that was asked was the most basic question, which is, why are we doing this process? Why do we even need to update the land use map and do anything if people like the way the city is now, and people aren't saying that there's significant problems in the city. And so the reason is that since the last general plan was adopted and the last land use map was adopted in 1970, it's been 50 years. The demographic and economic conditions have really changed significantly in the city. The land use map doesn't provide for the diversity of housing types that we've heard throughout the process that a large number of community members would like to see. There is the residential capacity needs to be reallocated from the established residential neighborhoods to where additional housing can be accommodated. And all of this, or part of this, is due to housing and the desire for a diversity of housing within the city. The city cannot provide its fair share of regional housing within the existing land use map, but that's only part of the reason why the land use map is being updated, and that's because there are uses that are needed to meet community objectives that we have heard throughout the process from the very beginning. So that's some of the background on why we are updating the land use map. So then the land use alternatives are the process that we go through to have a discussion about what those future land uses should be. The land use alternatives are not the final proposed land uses. They are different versions and different ideas for how future growth and development can occur in the city over time, and they are designed to test the values and ideas from the community engagement process so that we can do what we were very successful at doing, which is to spark a community conversation about how, about what the future land use in this city should be. They are the basis for a continued discussion that leads to the preferred alternative. And as we discussed at the previous meeting, the preferred land use alternative is going to be a combination of the alternatives. So we will pick and choose from the three different alternatives that were presented, make modifications, and that's what will come forward based on the input we receive from the GPAC as well as from the community at large. There was quite a bit of confusion and question about this difference between the overall capacity in the city and then growth projections. And capacity is, we sometimes use the term build out for that, but overall the capacity is a number, a theoretical number that is calculated if every parcel is built to the maximum allowed density. This is something that is unlikely, if not impossible, to be achieved. There is no time horizon that this would actually happen, and the current general plan and every general plan and every planning document in the state has a maximum capacity that is well beyond what the actual growth will likely happen in the city. A case in point is that the current capacity, and I'll get to this on the next slide, in the existing general plan is over 80,000 housing units. And clearly the city has not gotten to that point in the 50 years since the plan was adopted. Growth projections are something different. Growth projections use realistic estimates of the amount of growth that will happen in a set period of time based on market conditions. For this general plan, we're going to be looking at a time horizon of 2045, which is a little over 20 years. Development happens on a very slow pace. It takes a long time, especially for redevelopment of redevelopment of existing parcels, which is what would have to happen in Thousand Oaks for development to occur, since there's very little greenfield or undeveloped land that can be built. So there's lots of different numbers that have been used in the process, and there were lots of questions from the community about what those numbers represent. So I'm just going to go through those to make sure we're all on the same page. The first number is 81,124. And this is the citywide capacity number that is in the existing general plan, as well as reflected in all three of the alternatives. This number is not changing. The number can't go up because of Measure E, and it can't go down because of a state law called SB 330. So that is the number, the capacity that is going to be in the proposed general plan. The current number of housing units in the city is 48,000 approximately. And what this means is that there is an unbuilt capacity of 33,000 housing units. So this does not mean that 33,000 housing units are going to be built in the city. This is just the remaining unbuilt capacity based on the theoretical build out, the theoretical maximum build out. Another number that has been used a lot is 2621, or the RHNA number, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that is the city's fair share of demand in an 8-year period that the city needs to plan for. It doesn't need to build that amount of housing, but it needs to plan to make sure that that amount can be built. Now, a 25-year plan is going to be 3 cycles of the RHNA. So it's going to be that number. We can't only plan for that because it's not going to be the enough capacity for the time horizon of the general plan. Another question that was asked was whether the general plan requires new housing to be built, and does it require growth to happen in the city? And the answer is simply no. The plan dictates what type of development can happen and where that development can occur. It does not require that development to happen. And we've seen that again since the existing general plan was adopted in 1970, the existing land use map, with a capacity of 81,000 housing units. Only 48,000 housing units have been built. So the city is not going to require that any housing units be built. All that it can do is, or office, or retail, or industrial. It's just dictates the parameters under which that housing or that development can be built. So the city is also not required to build new housing. So with the RHNA number, the 2621, I always forget that number, but the 2621 number, it only has to plan for that housing. It has to have the space for it to occur. It doesn't require that that housing be built. Property owners are not required to build on their parcels. So even if there's a change in land use designation, it doesn't mean that someone has to build on their property. And the determination of that is based on market conditions. And as we discussed in a lot of the office hours, the market conditions are not necessarily right for people to change a current use that is bringing in revenue to a different use and take a risk in order for new development to happen. So what we end up seeing in urban areas like this, where, and by urban I mean developed, where there are uses already on the ground and uses already with tenants in them, that we tend to not see a lot of development, and that development happens on a very slow scale and gradually over time. So one of the other questions that came up, and this is really critical, is are there going to be other opportunities for continued community input? You know, is this the only time that the community is going to have a say in the land use process or in the general plan? And yes, there are going to be lots of opportunities. This process is going to keep going for another year. There's going to be the next step in the process is going to be a preferred alternative, which will have the opportunity for public input, both through an online survey, a public workshop, as well as planning commission and city council meetings. And then there are also all of these other topics that the general plan has to cover: parks, open space, transportation, public safety, noise, air quality, environmental justice, housing. All of these topics need to be discussed and will be included in the general plan as well. And then ultimately, when there is a draft general plan, there'll be a community conversation about the vision and the policies in that plan to make sure that they are right before they are reviewed and approved by the city council. All right. I am going to pause here. We're going to do a quick poll. Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you. So those who haven't done this before, we're going to do an online survey poll, and you all can give your responses. So Melissa, why don't you go ahead and launch?
Thanks, Matt. So we're going to launch our first poll for the evening. You're going to see a new screen pop up on your window. The question asks, did you take the land use survey? And the options are yes or no. As soon as we see that majority of folks have taken the survey, taken the poll, we will share the results with everyone. And so we'll pause here just for a minute longer. If you haven't already, please record your response, and we'll share the results in a moment. Okay, we're going to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like 82% of folks that are in the Zoom meeting now have taken the land use survey. So that's great, thank you.
Yep.
As soon as the results are no longer shared, you can click the X button in your upper right-hand corner, and you'll see a new window pop up when we launch the next poll.
Okay, and actually we should probably do the next poll now. We should, actually we'll do that afterwards. So this is, we will move on and talk about the survey results, and I'm moving through this because we want to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion about the survey results. Okay, so as I mentioned, there were over 2,000 total responses. There were a total of 2127 is in the raw number. Online, there were 2,098 in English, there were 4 in Spanish, and then there were hard copy of 19 English and 6 Spanish versions. The survey was open from February 2nd to March 15th. There were 33 questions. 6 of them were open-ended questions, 16 were questions with space for comments, and then 5 were demographic questions. The results are compiled for all of the survey types listed above, but it's important to note that not every respondent answered every single question. And I want to just point out that these are the preliminary responses. As I said, we got such a huge number of people who took the survey that it's taking a while to go through and clean the data. So this is the kind of the preliminary direction that we have here. And the reason we are doing this survey provides directionality and background so that you all can see, you as members of the community can see what other members think about these questions, and also for the City Council to understand the direction that the community has and what their opinions are. As you know, it's ultimately up to the City Council to decide the direction that they want the plan to go. So it's up to the City Council, regardless of what is in the survey itself. All that we are doing here is we are providing our input, our feedback. As the consultants, we're summarizing the results, and then we turn it over to the elected officials who will ultimately get to make this decision. The comments in the survey, you know, it's pretty easy to summarize, and what we're going to do this evening is really summarize the closed-ended questions where there were not written responses. So that information is pretty straightforward, and that's what we're going to present tonight. There were, with some of the closed-ended questions were the multiple choice questions, which we'll go through. There was an option for none of the above. And so when we presented different alternatives, we allowed people to say they didn't like any of those, and they could check that box and then write the things that they wanted. Those questions, the none of the above responses, correspond to a specific geographic question. So Rancho Conejo or the downtown area. And the majority of the responses that we got for none of the above were people who didn't like any of the alternatives. And they responded that they didn't like it and they wanted something different. And from our standpoint, this was expected, and we wanted to allow for the possibility to come up with their own ideas and say that they didn't like what was presented. There were also some open-ended questions that we had in the survey, and these generally were more balanced between comments that were positive and comments that were negative. What we did find is that if respondents generally liked an alternative or liked a direction, they were less likely to leave a comment. So the number of comments that were received for individual questions was not the full 2,100 in any one of the questions. The full report of all of the comments is available on the website. What we have done now is we wanted to get the results, the raw results out there now, and so we published the results in 2 forms right now. One is just the summary of the open-ended questions, and then the other is the full responses. So for every question that had either a none of the above, where people could write their comments and write their thoughts, or anything that was open-ended, we published all of those. And I just want to warn you, some people didn't like the direction and used foul language. But we wanted to just go ahead and put whatever people said unfiltered into the public record. And so you all can see everything that people said there. And that report is about 400 pages. So the survey demographics are an important place to start to understand who took the survey and whether it's close to representative of the community. And so the first question we asked was whether people lived and or worked in Thousand Oaks. And what we found here is that 97% of the people who took the survey either lived or lived and worked in the city. So we didn't get a lot of people who said that they were from outside of the city who took the survey. We asked the question of how long have you lived in Thousand Oaks? So we wanted to, again, see if it was more tilted towards people who had lived here a long time or not lived here for very long. And so you can see here in the graph on the left that we had almost half, about 46% of the respondents who have lived in the city for 21 years or more. And we had very few who, less than 1%, who lived in the city for a year or less, and only 6% who lived in the city for 5 years. So we really see this tilting a lot towards the people who have lived in the city for a very long time. The zip code here shows that there's some geographic distribution throughout the city with who took the survey. And the 91320, I believe, is Newbury Park. And so we got, I think, more respondents from this area of the city than from any other area. We looked at the age ranges of the survey to see, again, by age, who took the survey, and that's the graph on the left. And then on the right is the U.S. Census from 2017, the American Community Survey, for the demographic breakdown, the age breakdown of residents in the city. And we did this to try and look at the breakdown for the survey to see if it closely matched in the city. And what we see here, kind of what jumps out, is that the under 18 and the 18 to 24 is clearly very underrepresented in the survey, and that the 55 to 64 and 65 plus is overrepresented in the survey. And so, you know, again, not surprising that people who are under 18 tend not to be as involved. So again, it's not surprising to see this result, but this looks like it relatively closely tracks who the people are who live in the city from an age perspective. We also looked at this at the age range compared to the statistically valid survey that happened in 2020. And again, as you can see, the kind of the number of people in the different demographic categories are pretty close. We had slightly more in the 45 to 54 than the statistically valid survey. But again, we're not seeing huge shifts between who took the statistically valid survey and who took this survey in terms of age. We asked the question about race ethnicity. On the left is the results of who took the survey, and on the right is the ACS from 2017. What we see is that the survey had a higher percentage of those who identified as white and a lower percentage of those who identified as Hispanic and Latino. So it's a little overrepresented on the white population, but if you look at you know, all races and ethnicities other than white, it's a lot closer, because you can see that it's 22% compared to 31%, which, you know, is actually relatively close for a survey like this compared to other surveys we've done. Okay, so that's the demographics, and so what that tells us is that, you know, we did get some good age representation, demographic representation, and geographic representation. Again, this isn't a statistically valid survey, but it does provide directionality for us as we're looking at the results. I'm going to start going through the results of the surveys, and just to set this up, I want to reiterate what I had said from the last meeting, which is that there's commonalities between all of the alternatives. So all of the alternatives have neither a decrease nor an increase in the residential capacity of the city. All of the alternatives reallocated areas, unbuilt capacity from the residential areas into the areas of change. And the areas of change are what you see here in purple, as well as the 7 what we call village centers, which are the commercial centers throughout the city. The alternative 1 at the high level was trying to essentially focus development on a series of nodes throughout the city. And we got this information based on community surveys we had done previously where we asked where should new housing go, and people identified some specific locations, Newberry Park and Rancho Conejo, around the mall in the downtown area, and then on the east side of the city. And so we tried to represent that on the map in alternative 1 by having more focused areas of slightly higher density. Alternative 2 really spreads the density around and the residential uses around more consistently throughout the areas of change without more focused nodes. And alternative 3 focuses even higher density on the nodes, and in exchange for that actually has more of a focus on jobs. So alternative 3 is really focused on jobs and economic development while also having the same number of housing units. We asked some citywide questions, and the first question we asked was, overall, which alternative best matches your vision? And so we did this at the very beginning, and we can show how it varies slightly until the end. And so right from the beginning, when people had read the briefing book and participated in the process, it's weighted somewhat heavily towards alternative 1 of the sort of the nodal development, with alternative 3 in second place at 29%. And then none of the above, people who didn't like any of the alternatives, was 19%. So about 75% picked one of the 3 alternatives, 6% were not sure, and 19% didn't like any of the alternatives presented. We asked the question of where should housing or mixed-use development be located, and people could check you all as the respondents could check all of the areas that you thought it should be located. And the 2 areas where there was people identified the most is the Rancho Conejo area, and then the downtown and the Thousand Oaks Boulevard area, so the core of Thousand Oaks. We asked people whether they agreed with protecting the character of single-family residential areas and transferring that density into the corridors. And one of the strategies, if you'll remember, that we used for this was that the current land use designations allow for townhomes and small apartment buildings in the single-family neighborhoods based on the densities that are allowed. So someone could redevelop their parcel that's single-family, especially under new state law. And so we identified areas where we could move capacity onto the corridors into the areas of change. And we asked whether people agreed with that and how much they agreed. And what we see here is that only 10% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And so 85% of respondents took that. Could I ask that people please mute your phone so we can move through this? I'm hearing some comments. Thank you very much. The last citywide question is whether the maximum density of multifamily housing could be increased from 30 units an acre to 45 units an acre if the building height and the setbacks generally remain the same. And so what that does is it allows more housing to be built in a smaller area. It makes projects more feasible and allows for more affordable housing. And so what we found is that 70% of people said, yes, allow this to happen, allow densities of higher density, but while keeping the same building form. Moving through the alternatives, the Rancho Conejo area, I'm going to go from west to east. The 3 alternatives, since most of you really took the survey, you probably remember this, so I'm just going to go through this really quickly. This alternative really focuses on adding mixed use into the Rancho Conejo area and then south of the 101 freeway. Alternative 2 moves some of the mixed use, expands it south of the freeway, but then moves it into the existing commercial areas. And then alternative 3 has no mixed use north of the freeway and focuses the mixed use in the residential south of the freeway. The first question that we asked is about whether that Rancho Conejo, which has been this traditional major job center in the city, should it provide additional job opportunities by allowing more areas of higher intensity development. This doesn't mean increasing over existing in, over what's allowed in certain areas. It just means allowing more intensity in more areas. And so what we got was that 70% of respondents said that there should be a balance between the industrial low and the industrial flex. And so allow for some areas that are higher intensity office and some areas that are more lower scale industrial flex space. So that's, people essentially wanted a balance in this area. The next question was whether mixed use development should be integrated in with the commercial and industrial uses or whether they should be separated. And what we found is that more people wanted to allow mixed use in areas currently designated for jobs. And there's sort of a mix here, and some people basically said, no, we actually don't want this, just not at all, keep Rancho Conejo all commercial. So there's really this, there was sort of a mixed opinions here on this one. The next question was whether we agreed with the statement that the general plan should allow development of up to 4 stories and 45 units in Rancho Conejo if it reduces the amount of housing elsewhere in the city. 57, 60, almost 75% of people agreed with this statement, and about 25% of people disagreed with this statement, with 5% neither agreeing nor disagreeing. We asked at the end which alternative best matches your vision, and it was really balanced between alternative 1 and alternative 3. Alternative 3 was more focused on jobs. Alternative 1 was more focused on mixed use development on a larger area. So again, this provides some directionality for us to think about. Moving to the Moorpark Road area and West Thousand Oaks Boulevard area. This includes the Thousand Oaks Mall, Jan's Marketplace, and then the western edge of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. The 3 alternatives, one focuses more intense development around on the eastern edge of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, as well as in the Thousand Oaks Mall area. Alternative 2 has more of a focus on Jan's Marketplace for mixed use and expands the area of mixed use. And then alternative 3 keeps kind of even higher intensity, but actually adds more jobs. And to offset the number of jobs, here you see in the red and which is commercial, and then the gray, which is industrial, it allows higher intensity mixed use development. We did a visual preference survey here and asked people to have a reaction to the 6 images for development at the Jan's Marketplace and at the Oaks Mall. And what we found here is that there was a lot of acceptance for a wide range of buildings. The 4-story, this is a 4-story residential, 68%, almost 70% said they love it or like it. 3-story residential, 75% said they love it or like it. 4-story mixed use, 72%. But we also saw that people are sort of willing to accept a range of things, including commercial, more traditional commercial. What we did see, one thing which was interesting, was that the jobs, more heavily jobs focused building, such as number 6, there was a third of the people said no way to this one, which was the highest of any of them. For the area on Thousand Oaks Boulevard, between Moorpark Road and north of Wilbur, it's currently retail and commercial, and we asked what people thought should happen in this area, and there was sort of overwhelming 70% said that it should really stay as commercial. And so the direction here was really make sure that that Moorpark Road has more of a commercial focus rather than allowing mixed use or residential development. For the area on the west side of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, we showed some photographs of essentially 3, 4, and 5-story mixed use or residential buildings. And what we found here is that that between 70 and 78% of people responded positively as like it or love it to these buildings, and up to 20% or less said no way, they didn't like it at all. We asked which alternative best matches your vision, and people said a mix between alternative 1 and alternative 3. And you'll see that that's a commonality throughout the whole process. For the downtown area, the 3 alternatives, again, the alternative 1 is focusing higher density development while allowing mixed use. Alternative 2 is spreading mixed use throughout the whole area. And then alternative 3 is a combination of the 2. There's less differentiation with these alternatives. And you can see that in the results of what best describes your vision, we asked for different scales of development, and a lot of people picked more, just under half picked mixed use high, which is 5 stories and 60 units an acre. 32% said 4 stories and 45 units an acre. 17% keep it as mixed use low, which is 3 stories and 30 units an acre. And 6% had other ideas for what should happen. We asked whether the city should allow multifamily residential buildings without the requirement for commercial uses along Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and nearly 3/4 of the people said yes, that multifamily housing should be allowed on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And then the question of which best matches your vision, it was split between alternative 1 and alternative 3, and 12% didn't like any of them and had their own ideas. For the Westlake and East End area, these alternative 1, there's some variety here, but alternative 1 had a stronger focus on mixed use development north of the Ventura Freeway along Thousand Oaks Boulevard, as well as sort of 2 nodes of mixed use at where the Kmart Center is, and then in the Westlake Shopping Center. Alternative 2, expanded mixed use, kept non-residential uses for the most part north of the freeway, except for north of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and then expanded mixed use in what is the area that is now a job center on the south side of the freeway. And then alternative 3 was really focused on jobs and maintained and expanded the intensity of some of the industrial and the jobs areas, and created a mixed use node at all 4 corners at Thousand Oaks Boulevard and Westlake Boulevard. We asked for the Townsgate Road area, which is the gray area here on the south side of the freeway. We asked whether it should be mixed use or whether it should allow for, maintain it the way it is, or allow for more intense office to make it more of a job center. And 43% of the people said it should be slightly more intense slightly more intense jobs. The idea of adding mixed use was not as positive in this area. We asked for the Westlake Plaza and Center whether it should be mixed use or whether it should maintain the commercial uses, and 73% said keep it as commercial. We asked whether Thousand Oaks Boulevard and Westlake Boulevard, so that intersection, should maintain its focus as retail and shopping, or should mixed use be allowed. 30% said maintain commercial, and then 65% would consider some form of mixed use, either on all 4 corners or just a limited amount of mixed use. What best describes your vision? For the east side, which is where the current office complex is, that 42% said keep it as employment, as an employment district. 22% said it can expand to include commercial, and only 26% said allow for some residential. So only 1/4 said allow for some residential in this area. So more of a focus, the message here is more of a focus on jobs. Overall, people liked alternative 3. People wanted to keep it seemed like people wanted to keep the east end of the city more as jobs and as a commercial focus, with limited amount of mixed use in this area. The last area is the village centers. We gave 3 options for these 7 village centers around the community. One is a combination of mixed use low or commercial development. So some mixed use low, some commercial. Alternative 2 was just leave them all commercial as they are now, and alternative 3 was make them all mixed use. And what we heard is that 58% of people basically said keep them all as commercial and don't allow residential in this area. Only a quarter of respondents said that it should be converted to mixed use in all areas. The conclusion at the very end, we said, now that you've reviewed the detailed alternatives, what alternative best matches your vision? Alternative 1 came out as the leader here at 37%, followed by alternative 3. What I have highlighted here was we added the option in this question of whether people wanted to keep the existing general plan or whether they didn't like any of the above and wanted something different. And so 11% of the people said keep the existing general plan, and 6% of the people said they don't like any of the options. 12% said a combination of the alternatives. Okay, I went through that really quickly. I know it still took a long time. There's a lot of information here. As we move into the next, we're going to move into the discussion, but we do have a lot of members of the public, and we'd like to get a sense of how many people want to give a public comment at the end so we can allocate time. We're supposed to end the meeting at a little after 8 o'clock tonight, as we typically do. So Melissa, if you could launch the next poll about the public comments so we can get a sense of timing.
Yeah, so now you should see a poll on your screen, and it's asking if you would like to speak at the public comment period tonight. You could go ahead and respond to this. We will share the results shortly and get a head count for our speakers this evening.
Okay, let's just give it another minute.
Mm-hmm. And we have one short poll after this as well to gauge your responses. So we'll do that as soon as this poll closes. All right.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and
Why don't we go ahead
close
and,
this.
yep, so we're going to have about, so this is going to help us with time. We're going to have 11 people said yes. So we'll try and keep it, we'll allocate time based on that number.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and launch our last poll. So this poll asks, what is your overall impression or reaction to the survey results? And the options are not surprised at all, somewhat surprised, or very surprised.
So, and as a reminder, if you had your poll up before, you can close and then launch this one and look at this one.
That's right.
Okay, and then after this, after we get these results, we're going to have the GPAC. I would like to ask you to raise your hands. What we would like to get is just kind of feedback and thoughts from GPAC members on the survey and on the direction, your opinion of the direction that we should go. We'd like to ask you to keep your comments concise so we can make sure that we hear from everyone this evening. So the poll is closed, and about half of people who responded said that they were somewhat surprised, with the rest split between very surprised and not surprised at all. Thank you for that. That's really helpful to see. Okay. So let's, I'm going to move to the discussion here, the discussion question. So for the GPAC members, what surprised you about the survey results and what was not surprising? And then based on the survey results and based on your own opinions, you know, what is your, do you have a preferred direction that you saw that you think we should go in for the preferred alternative? And just to remind everyone that the next step in the next phase of this process is that the team is going to take this information from the survey, create a preferred alternative, which may have some options in it, and then release that preferred alternative to the public. We'll have another public workshop. We'll have another GPAC meeting so we can get comments on that preferred alternative. And then that will go to the Planning Commission and then the City Council. So this is going to give us some direction for how the preferred alternative gets formed. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can see each other more, and then we can come back to that as we need to later. So there are Well, if GPAC members want to give some comments and share some ideas, that would be great. We have, I'll start with Darren. And go ahead and lower your hand and then say what you give your
Great.
comments.
Can you hear me, Matt?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, great job. Thanks for putting that all together. Great job on the survey. Great job on, I know it's a lot of hard work that you guys have undertaken after all those survey results. So thank you for spending the time to go through all of that. So I'll focus just a few quick comments on kind of the Moore Park, Thousand Oaks Boulevard area. I wasn't super surprised. I mean, it was very overwhelming that the public asked that area stay commercial. 70%, I think, wanted no change. I'm not very surprised by that. I think when you look at it at its face, you look around with your eyes and you see that there are a lot of shopping centers, and you have the Oaks Mall and you have the Janss Marketplace, and you may not have the vision for where you're going to put a bunch of housing. But I think we need to be very careful when we put together the land use designations when it comes to the Oaks Mall and the Janss Marketplace in particular. I think properties like Westlake Promenade, as an example, on the east side of town, are very suited for long-term commercial viability, where the Westlake Promenade is built with buildings around the rear, some pad buildings, and then a big parking area. I think that's traditionally how you would see a shopping center. When you compare that to Janss Marketplace, which is a center that is much older, it was added on to, and now you have an antiquated shopping center where you have some buildings up front, you have walkways in the middle, you can't see the tenants that are in the shopping center necessarily. So I think it is very important for shopping centers like Janss to have the ability in the future to modify. I always think the Oaks Mall and the Janss Marketplace will have an element of commercial. There's going to be theaters, there's going to be entertainment, there's going to be restaurants. But I think we've all seen the transition in real estate. I mean, I've only been doing real estate for 18 years. And when I started, we were leasing buildings to Blockbuster Video. So if I told that to my kids now, they think I rode around in a horse and buggy. So I think it's changing very quickly. Oaks Mall is set up more like an outdoor mall. I think they can continue in the way they are, but it's very large. There's a lot of retail in Thousand Oaks and not as many people to sustain financial viability. So I think these larger parcels, Janss and Oaks, and I'd ask you if we're allowed to have multiple land use designations for larger properties. So I would recommend the Oaks Mall and the Janss Marketplace be given multiple land use designations. I think I could see both of them being, mixed use high, mixed use medium, and having an opportunity to do that in the future, to take portions of those shopping centers and convert them to some type of mixed use and some type of, commercial, residential, and those types of things. So I would ask that we consider multiple designations if we could for some of the larger parcels. But I think it's important that we look at these older shopping centers and allow in the future, and you've stated earlier, it's not like they're just magically going to turn into houses. We're going to have plenty of commercial for a long time. But I think we should think about multiple designations, or at least having mixed use designations on the Oaks Mall and the Janss Marketplace. And that's what I had to say.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other GPAC members who want to comment? Jennifer, I see your hand up next.
I was a little surprised by the lack of enthusiasm for the village centers concept when that was tested separately. I and a lot of folks that I've talked to are really pretty big fans of that concept. Obviously, we like the idea of a downtown core that is, provides more of a sense of place and some more density, but I think it's also exciting to think about neighborhood centers that are more walkable and more the 15-minute city idea that I think we talked about in several of our meetings, or at least in some small groups we did, as well as providing, some more critical mass for walkability and diversity of the housing stock close to existing neighborhoods, just for some different options for older folks, younger families, single parents, whatever it might be, just some more accessibility to diversity of housing. I think it would be really a shame if we moved away from that idea altogether. I would really like to see that continue to be on the table.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Nick, you're next.
Great, thanks. There are a few comments that I wanted to try to make sure that we have as part of the conversation. I think that I want to thank you for putting some of those numbers that we have out there, the theoretical build out numbers, the number of units that we have, number of units that as a part of our updated the housing element are important for us to make sure we can accommodate. There's a missing element of a number that I think that is important for this discussion, and that's what the realistic build out number is for the city, both historically and when you look at the general plan plus the applied zoning that we have in the city. And that has been historically around 50,000 units. We have 48,000 now. That's where we've been in plateau. Our public policies have been guided toward that for a very, very long time, which is one of the reasons I think that when we hear people talk about the 80,000 units, it is a very large public disconnect between what we're looking to end up doing. So I think it's a really important real number that I think we have to take into consideration. With respect, I like some of the.
Can I ask you a question, actually?
Yeah, go ahead.
So sorry to interrupt. I just, because I think this is an important, part of the conversation, which is, where does the 50,000 come from as a number? Because I
actually
heard
a
that.
really good source. If you were to look at the 2011 environmental impact report for the Thousand Oaks specific Boulevard specific plan, that number, let me just bring it up exactly.
Okay, so that's something that was done for purpose of
49,600. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that was done for purpose of environmental analysis for that document.
Right, but historically, that is effectively the real number that when everybody is talking about our residential capacity, how many units we have available to be built, our current zoning is applied, and how Measure E has historically been applied in viewing what we have available and what the council allows. That's the number that the community has generally been working toward. So there is a very big disconnect. I want us to make sure that we have that clear understanding as to what that is.
I just want to be careful with the language of the community since you're speaking for yourself here. And I think everyone needs to make sure they're speaking for themselves here. And,
Nick
it
is a
may be
longtime
people you're
resident.
I've
talking to. Thank you. Please don't interrupt. So I hear you say that you and other residents say that. So I just want to be clear. It's, when you say the
just as a
community.
note, I've served on the planning commission. I was on that commission at the time of the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan. So I would like to think that I'm coming with a little bit of historic understanding in this. So
okay.
So
great. So sorry to interrupt that, but yeah, do you want to keep going with your comments?
Yeah, exactly. So I think when we come to the identified areas of what could potentially be done, I think there's some really interesting things for us to consider. I personally believe, I actually share Darren's comments about, I believe the most natural place for any place that could potentially handle a shift is the Moore Park Jan's Marketplace area. I think for the reasons the Oaks Mall and Jan's Marketplace, we have to really look at the economic changes that are happening and if those might be the best and most natural downtown areas for us to really consider. So if there was one place to focus on first, that would be my thought. Taller buildings, I'm not generally a fan. I think that when it comes to the pace of change, I think that we ought to take that in consideration how this gets implemented. And I think historically, the Thousand Oaks has been a slow growth city. And I think we want to make sure that the pace of change, not that there is no change, but that the pace of change is there. I would also ask that the public and the GPAC look at the briefing book and the comments that were made in the briefing book with respect to that, the nature of, and agreed, there is some, please be careful about some of the language that was used in some of them, but for the most part, sentiment of them and those that were, I really like the agree, disagree parts of that when you can actually see previous comments, you could agree or disagree with them. Those are very, very different than the survey results. So I think you want to look at the nature of who's kind of coming in and being able to articulate their voice and whether it was easy given the nature of the questions and how they were worded on where they want to do. So it's important to take those into consideration. So a lot there. I'll allow the others to.
Well, I'm glad you like the being able to do thumbs up, thumbs down for those.
Yeah, I thought it was really valuable.
That we use. Good. Yeah. There's regardless of anyone's personal opinion, there's a lot of rich conversation and a lot of ideas and a lot of time went into this, which is just
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Chase.
Yes, I'm looking over the surveys, and there are a lot of negative comments in there, which I expected because there seems to be a perception that the general plan update is, sort of a guaranteed change as opposed to sort of a blueprint. So a lot of those negative comments didn't surprise me, but I do agree that a lot of the room for change and land designation use, it should be around the Oaks and the Jan's Marketplace, because there's already been a retail bubble, a decline in retail, and after the pandemic, there could be a further decline. Another thing I want to mention is Thousand Oaks did see a slight population decline. That was just through a population estimate in the last year. And I'd like to see when the census numbers come out, how that might impact, the need for housing, because I don't know if we're going to have more people moving out because of the cost of living, and with the pandemic, you don't know what's going to happen with that. But pretty much I think what is happening with housing now, what's going to happen in the city with housing now, is that we're mostly looking to provide housing for people who are already here, and may need to, downsize or maybe get a bigger place or something. It doesn't look like we're looking to expand or bring in more population or build housing for an increased population. It seems the demand is for people that are already here, or maybe people who want to move back who have lived here previously. But
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. Nick, you are next, and I believe Nick actually came to every single one of the virtual open houses, so he heard all of the conversation.
Yeah, I missed the second hour of one of them, but I tried to pop in for everything. So after those open houses, I reached out to a bunch of people I know in the 25 to 34 age range, since they seem somewhat underrepresented at the various meetings, to get their takes on things. And the main things I heard back from them, and they all also took the survey to my knowledge, but the big things, the things they're most passionate about among all the things that that were being discussed. Number one, they loved mixed use concepts. That felt like those felt like sort of areas that they want to live in. Mixed use, walkable, lots of greenery, trees, that sort of thing. 3 to 5-ish stories seem to be pretty popular. None of them seems like super thrilled with going way high, nor with really like 1-story buildings. With the exception at the Jan's Marketplace, they were really into having Jan's be a big population center. They also saw the potential there for revitalization in that area. So they both cared about more residential mixed use type stuff at Jan's and the Oaks, and then along the Teal Boulevard. They had less strong opinions on the far east and the far west of the city. And they were also really big on the village centers and having places for people to go to that didn't involve going to the 101 corridor. And they were very happy that these things were under discussion because focus on single family homes felt like it was missing them entirely, because a lot of folks in the age range don't have the $100,000 needed to make a down payment to get a single family home. Most of them were not homeowners. Most of them had to rent because that was the only option they had in the city. So having a way to transition out of small apartments or a bunch of people sharing a home into condos or that sort of thing was something that they were very fond of. So I just wanted to convey that they all filled out, but these were like where they really, really, really were like, oh gosh, this is so exciting. If the city only did this, I would move back. I got forced out. I would move to the city to be close to my job in the city, that sort of thing. So.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I don't see any other hands up. Are there any other comments from GPAC members? Give a second here.
Victor has his hand up.
Victor, are you? There you go.
It's more of a comment, but looking at the results of the survey, I'm a little bit surprised and not surprised that the numbers were low in the 18 to 24 range. But part of me thinks that a little bit of that is because of the, if you're thinking about jobs and where you're going to go after school or graduation or what have you, I think I don't know how many kids in that age are thinking that there's opportunities here. So I think the development of additional, businesses and job opportunities would be more beneficial, or would make more of the younger age demographic look at a potential of what this means in the bigger picture here for Thousand Oaks. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I'll say, just having done this work for 25 years, it is not surprising. These surveys tend to skew older for who takes the surveys. Not that, and just because what people are focused on. And so not a surprise that there were not as many from the 18 to 25 who took the survey. All right, Andy.
Hey, so good evening, Matt. And just let me congratulate you and your team and echo the comments of my fellow committee members. The process that you put together really, really has been impressive. And I guess what I would share with the committee, they already know it, but the broader community is, from my perspective, this process should focus on the process. Trust this process. It has worked out well. And with a good process, we're going to have a good outcome. I've heard a lot of conversation and discussion about, specific numbers. And I just would encourage the committee, don't get so focused in on these numbers, whether you're going to advocate for or against, slow growth, a mid approach, or something very aggressive. Just stick to the process. I really think our process is going to serve us well. I will say this: I wasn't completely surprised about the survey results. If you've been kind of in touch with what's been happening in our community, we have some forward-thinking folks that want to keep the quality of life high in Thousand Oaks, but also recognize that we can't stay the same. And this concept of the single family residence, that's all we have, is outdated. It can't be sustained. And we really do need to look at different types of housing stock. My overview would be keep your options open. For me, I think a balanced approach is really the best. We ought to be sprinkling the different land uses around the different areas of change that have been identified. I think the Rancho Conejo area certainly has plenty of opportunity for some attention in that area. It's my experience that a lot of folks that live in Thousand Oaks are really not that familiar with the Rancho Conejo area. And so it's tucked away. And so that certainly could be an area for consideration. If we can put some density in the Rancho Conejo, then that lowers some of the pressure for Thousand Oaks Boulevard and some of the other areas where maybe we do want to have a more low profile, 3 or 4 story element sprinkled in. So, I would just say, keep your options open. Don't get locked into numbers. as far as this goes, I hear, the 30,000 numbers thrown around. I think ultimately we're going to end up at a number much lower than that when it all gets washed out. But I would encourage the committee to embrace this opportunity. We're doing a general plan here. We're not doing housing element. And Matt, I don't know if you spent some time talking about the difference between a housing element and a general plan. This is the blueprint for our entire community. Let's not have some micro perspective on a minimal housing element. It needs to be a general plan that's going to serve our community for the next 20, 30, 40 years. We need to have some vision as we're looking at this and not get caught into, less is more, the minimum must be good. This is a general plan. It's not a housing element. So, I think it's an opportunity for this committee to have its, really have an impact in its recommendation to the council. And I can tell you without any hesitancy, the council is going to weigh very heavily on the feedback it gets from this committee. We really believe and embrace the committee process, and this committee has done a really good job. So, I would just continue to be flexible. Don't get focused in on specific numbers. It'll work itself out in the process, and look at balance across the community. The other thing is those results. Measure E's been thrown around a lot. I'll just throw a little fact out for you. Measure E passed with, I think, somewhere around 75% of the vote, and it was considered a landslide. So I'm seeing numbers in the 70s and the 75% for a lot of these areas. We have to pay attention to that. That is a reflection of our community. And, that is a number that we have to look at, is that folks have a different perspective. And, relative to the 50,000, what was, in some number that was looked at with a specific plan, I'm just going to go back to the survey. 6% of the people said keep things the way they are. So I think there needs to be more of a progressive viewpoint on where we're going. If we're going to reflect what the survey said, and actually if we're going to actually be realistic about our housing needs and what's going on in Sacramento and a lot of other stuff. So those are my general comments, and I think there'll be opportunity to kind of weigh in as this process unfolds. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy. Tara.
Good evening. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate the work and all of my committee members chiming in. I want to echo what Jennifer said. I was also a little surprised at the lack of support and positive feedback around the village centers concept, based on some of the conversations we had had as a GPAC and some of the other feedback we had received through other community, meetings and surveys. And I think keeping that option on the table seems like it could be a way to better integrate mixed uses of housing or different types of housing. There's been a lot of conversation about racial equity and, not segregating different segments of the community. And I think that is one way where we don't end up having all of the apartments or affordable units in one part of the community and single family homes in another part. I also was a little concerned about the low response rate from our Hispanic and Latino neighbors, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to, through this process, do more engagement with that group and get their feedback as well, just because of that disproportionate rate of who lives here. But I agree also with Mr. Fox's comments about just keeping our options available to us and thinking of this as a blueprint looking forward. So thank you.
Okay, let's see. Okay, other, Victor, do you want to go ahead? Oh, actually, Victor, why don't you go ahead and then we'll come back.
There was one part in the survey that, to me, would be concerning is, if I'm understanding it correctly, about changing the density per acre. going from 30 to 45, as long as the building height and setbacks remain generally the same. I mean, we're essentially talking about more people living in the same space where it would typically be 30 units. We would add 15 more units. Am I correct in that? Is that how I'm interpreting it?
Yes, you are interpreting that correctly. The one piece is that we actually, if you remember back probably a year ago, we showed some massing models of buildings, and you can actually, in the same building form, actually having a 4-story building that's 50 feet, it's very easy to get 45 units in it with still a lot of open space and a combination of 1 and 2 bedroom units. And so it becomes more financially feasible, if it even is feasible, to build that than it is at 30 units an acre. And so what we talked about previously is that people see the form and character of the building, and that's what they experience rather than the actual number. So you can actually meet the housing needs in fewer projects if you do that.
But then the increased number of residences then has a trickle down effect, which i.e. means more parking, more traffic, right?
It would be just more people in fewer. It would be the same number of people in fewer buildings, rather than is because it's a lot of this is based on market economics. And we can, I hear your question. We can, if you want, we can have a sidebar to talk about some of the details. But the idea is, again, if you can make projects more financially feasible, have more affordable housing in those buildings, and it doesn't have a visual impact on the city, it's not going to. That's what people essentially responded to in the survey.
Yeah, I get that piece from the outside, but from the inside, then by increasing the number of units, that would make each unit. I mean, the space, it has to come from somewhere, so it would come from square footage, right? So it would all be essentially smaller units.
Yeah, but this is the piece that I'm trying to say is that the 30 units an acre can lead to very large units, and builders aren't building those. They're building 1 and 2 bedroom units, which is how they're more financially feasible. So those projects, the 45 units an acre in the same building form is more financially feasible than 30 units an acre in that same amount.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Patrick.
Thanks, Matt. So I actually had a lot of fun with this over the past several months, going out to several peer groups. So kind of picking up where Nick left off in describing the 25s to 34s, that kind of puts me right up into my peer group, into the 34s to 45s. And I grew up out here. I grew up in Newbury Park. So I actually took the opportunity to talk to most of my friends that I grew up out here with don't live here. So ask their opinions on things. And then most of my, I have 4 young kids. So talked to a lot of my friends out here who live here, who didn't grow up here. And I hope I got a lot of those people to take surveys, but what I learned was the same. I think the evolution of retail, the downtown corridor was, they liked they didn't like some of them didn't like the idea of more traffic, but then they thought of, well, man, that would just be so cool if they had something like this. So I brought 5 or 6 of them over to the Lupe site, to the new complex over there, and we walked it. And that new iced tea shop over there, everyone thought that was awesome, and the feel of that was really cool. So it was interesting to kind of look at that and go down there with some of my buddies who are here, are pretty involved in, some of them no growth, and then looking at that. But I think it was, that was an area of focus. The Oaks Mall and Jans Mall was pretty unanimous. So again, those survey results were surprising. I think, most of my peer group thought that would be a great place to mix up as retail is evolving, and to be big pads of land that you can have a great feel around, and think of things like Stonehouse over in Westlake Village area and other outdoor type things where you can bring families, kids, and have more of a sense of community, and also have young people. The other peer group that I talked to quite a bit was within the industry that houses out in Rancho Canayo area. So a lot of the industrial companies that occupy, manufacturers, tech companies, and mostly biotech. So I spent a lot of time with them, folks like Atara, Westlake Bio, and Amgen folks, same thing. And the big thing that was discussed there over and over was talent, and just for them to sustain and or grow, needing younger employees who there are very few that are here. And usually they're coming from West LA or other parts of LA. And that's a hard thing to sustain. So I think that was interesting. I think that Rancho Canayo area became kind of an area of focus. The areas I heard the people did not want was, Westlake and Teal Boulevard. That area, there's just a lot of traffic there in the mornings around those signals with those, with schools there and a lot coming out. So that was an area of concern just with overall traffic. So the main three areas were kind of Rancho Canayo area in and around supporting the businesses and some of those retail centers that have been, struggling over there. And then Oaks, Jan's, and downtown corridor with kind of that community feel. So that was the feedback I got from kind of that 35-year-old to 45-year-old group, as well as the biotech industry as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Interesting that some of you are picking up on some of the same surprising things with the results of the survey. And I guess I too, just in the whole process, we keep hearing about Oaks and Jan's as these places for mixed use in that area. Then when the survey came out, it was a little different. So I wasn't sure why that was. And same thing with the village centers was another surprise based on what we'd heard in the process so far. Are there other GPAC members who want to provide some comments? Not everyone has had a chance to speak. So if others would like to, please raise your hand.
Matt, can you hear me? This is Fred.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm sorry, I guess I couldn't find the raise my hand button, but.
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
I apologize. Number one, I think is fantastic that you've been reaching out to the public. One of the things I saw in the survey that stood out to me was, the feeling, whatever you do, don't destroy the feeling of openness here. Don't destroy my view. That they're okay with the Thousand Oaks specific plan where you have mixed use housing with business, but let me see the mountains. I don't want overcrowdedness, traffic. They're okay with the Jan's Mall and Thousand Oaks Mall mixed use concept, but please don't create undue traffic and congestion because we don't want to destroy the flavor, the quality of life that we enjoy here. That's what I heard loud and clear. And I have to agree with that. And I think one of the things that someone allayed the fears of people that this is going too fast, but that the city is going to take a measured approach and go about this slowly, carefully, so that people will be able to digest the change and know it's not going to overwhelm them. So thank you for so much.
Thanks, Fred. I have a quick follow-up question. When you said the city should take a measured approach, you mean to the evolution of the city over a long period of time, not the decision-making process about the general plan, right? I want to clarify that it's
right, the actual implementation, so that people.
But it's slow and
fact, so it's not shoved down their throats all of a sudden, so that they won't have a chance to see that this is going in a really logical, careful way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. And one of the other points you brought up actually goes to the other surveys that we've done about the qualities that people love about the city, which were pretty unanimous as well, or pretty overwhelmingly positive. People don't want to see, they want to keep the open space. They love the views of the hills, and they love the natural areas. So, people like the single family neighborhood. So we heard that a lot and previously in the process, not in this survey because we didn't ask it because we'd heard it before, but we heard that as well a lot in the process. So that's not lost. I'm glad you brought that up, but that's not lost either, that this is in addition to all of the other information we've heard. Are there other GPAC members, people who have not had a chance to speak, who would like to, or people who have not
Alicia
had
has her hand raised.
Oh, there she is, Alicia. Just raised it. Go
Hi,
ahead.
no, thank you for all the job you're doing. I just want to make a quick comment about the participation of our Hispanic community. I think, well, I'm sorry, I'm kind of sick right now, but I was really hoping to have more involvement from my community, but what I found and what that they say was like hard to understand the survey, that there was so much communication, and I tried to have them come to the meetings, the ones that you provided, but they will be working, and so I think that's. But the main reason was it was hard to understand the concept, the whole mapping and the whole project. So I think that's one of the reasons why we have low participation from our community. I just want to make that comment.
Thank you. And we did have some focus meetings with some of the service organizations who are dealing and working with the Spanish-speaking community. So we did reach out to them and work with them, and then a lot of surveys were distributed. But we certainly understand that the information is complex. It's difficult to. It's pretty heavy. So.
And I appreciate that you tried. And yes, I was one of those meetings, and I invited a lot of people, but they couldn't make it. So, but I appreciate that part. No, trying to.
Well, I
reach out
I think
to
it's a step in the direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It clearly needs to continue. Yep. Okay, other GPAC members, and if not, we can move into public comments. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. So why don't I ask members of the public if they could use the raise hand feature. If you want to go ahead and provide a public comment, if you could please raise your hand now, that would be appreciated. And as
just a reminder that we'd like members of the public who are going to be speaking, if you could keep your comments brief. We do have some next steps that Matt will be walking us through before we close out the meeting tonight.
Okay. So again, I only see 4 hands. We had 11 before. Does that mean the other 7 don't want to provide comments? I just want to make sure we have a good amount of time here. Okay, I'm going to start, and I think we'll give about a minute and a half for public comments at this point, so we can try and end the meeting on time. And we're going to start with Deb Gill. You've had your hand up and been patient. Thank you, Deb. If you want to unmute yourself, and then if you'd like to turn on your video, that would be great, so we can see you. And Deb, I see you are still muted. Okay, I am going to, since I don't hear Deb, we can come back. Eric Tremblay.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Hi, Eric.
Hey, I just had a few quick comments. Mainly, I heard 2 of the GPAC members speak about the village centers, and I'd like to talk about that now. I think that might be very specific to each community, because I can speak for the lot behind the Albertsons on Kimber Drive, the Cohen property. We had a huge turnout at the city council meetings fighting against the desire to put apartments there, and now we're talking about mixed commercial. And so I think that if you're going to talk about village centers, you really might want to be more very site specific, because to say generally that all village centers feel that way is really out of touch, at least with this particular part of our community. And here's the fears that I think we have, that I have, that has echoed from everyone that I've talked to, is that we see these density numbers and we see what developers are doing already. And they use these density numbers and then tack on extra density to these numbers through the use of California law with RHNA values and using low income housing as a way to boost the numbers. So now you're talking about increasing a density that's going to have a number increase on top of that because of California law. And they're not building these buildings so far. The projects we've seen either come to fruition or be presented are filling the entire lot with a building, underground parking with 1.6 spaces allotted per housing unit, which isn't realistic in California, or I think in a lot of the country. Most people are going to have at least 2 cars, which is going to lead to the trickle down effect that was mentioned about the parking and,
Eric,
and where does that
thank
go.
you. It's been a minute and a half. Just if you could wrap up, please, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. I just think that if you're gonna have these mixed commercial uses, that even allows more densities, and that's going to be a huge factor here, and it's going to get taken advantage of by developers, and that's what we're going to be fighting against, is the extreme densities.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Let's see. Anne Marie.
Sure. Okay? You can hear me? Making sure.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm just noticing I'm super confused. I apologize. I very much am impressed with the effort and the amount of work and time that's gone into this effort, but I'm confused at how we are actually accessing, informing the entire community about this effort. My personal experience is that the majority of folks around me do not know about this. It's like we're all playing detective to find out where the survey is and how to get the Zoom meeting. And folks that I know that want to be here on this meeting, they were not informed. And then this evening, when folks are trying to speak up and speak their opinion, I'm finding that they're actually cut off. And I actually would like to see when and where could the public be able to voice our opinions about this. I appreciate the GPAC members that are representing the community, and I appreciate their speaking up. But I'm not feeling that this evening is representing what I saw on the actual survey when I completed it, the virtual survey. There was a way to put like a bubble and then add a comment on the different pages. And my personal experience was that at least 80 to 85% of those were supportive of slow growth.
Okay, and thank you. If you could finish up, that'd be great. Thank you.
So I'd like to know, when can we speak up and have access? Because I'm finding that we're being cut off, and I don't feel it's very fair to the whole community. So can you tell us where we can get the actual accurate results of your survey and find out?
Yep, we'll have that at the end of the presentation. We actually have that information.
Great.
Okay, Roseanne.
Good evening. So I read through every single comment in the survey results last night and didn't get much sleep. So my question is, I would like to know how the individual comments are going to be accounted for in the numerical data and in making decisions about how the land use map or the preferred land use map is going to actually be designed. And I would like to give a couple of examples of why I have that question. For instance, on question number 15 that had to do with the downtown and Teo Boulevard area with regard to allowing increased densities, 45% of the respondents suggested that they were in favor of mixed use high density. But if you look at the actual comments that were written in none of the above, and I personally use none of the above for every single thing, not because I'm opposed to any of these concepts, but because I like combinations of the concepts. So I take umbrage with the characterization that people who choose none of the above are being negative. But if you look at those comments for that same question, we had 61 people who said they wanted no mixed use, no change, and we had
And-
38.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you, you're at a minute and a half. If you could keep, wrap up, that'd be great so we can get through to other comments. I
So
apologize.
basically, the comments are very different from the end results that are reflected in all the other answers. And I would really like an opportunity to discuss this. My other question has to do with the fact that under comments in Rancho Conejo on question number 9, it appears
And I'm
somebody.
sorry, we're going to have to move on and let other
Oh,
people
that's your
speak this evening so we can end on time.
every single speaker gets the same response from you.
We had said we're going to try and keep the meeting to 8 o'clock. There's going to be a planning commission meeting next week. I apologize, but we had said we're going to try and keep this meeting to ending at 8 o'clock this evening. If there's time at the end, we can circle back to other folks. Pablo?
Hi, my comment is I want to echo the comments of some of my community members. I don't believe that the comments are a true representation of the questions. It is clearly most of the community members would like to preserve the low density lifestyle. I moved from the San Fernando Valley to Thousand Oaks for a reason. The low density in the Thousand Oaks is something to attract me here. I will hate that we lose that. And we might wonder, like, how is it that 120,000 people right now, according to what I'm hearing, is we're not going in a financial sound path if we maintain the same population right now. But you might wonder, how is it the new 80,000 new housing some of them low income, will increase revenues for the city? What I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's better to have less than more, depending on the quality of what are we attracting to the city. I think that if we want to increase revenues, maybe attracting better paying jobs to the city will be a better option than providing low housing income. That is my comment.
Okay, thank you very much.
You didn't cut him.
Barbara Collins.
Hi, yes, thank you. I live in the Rancho Conejo subdivision, and of course the survey results are skewed that everything should happen out here. And that's because people in Westlake don't want it there. So my question is, if we get to the point that, yeah, you're going to build out back here, will you survey the 990 homeowners in our subdivision? Hey, what do you want back here? Because I feel like they didn't know about it. I found out about it last minute. And I think if you're going to go into somebody's backyard, you need to ask them what they want in their backyard. That's all.
Good for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Let's see, Wendy.
I've lived in Newbury Park since 1993, and I'm here for my own purposes, but I serve on the Casa Conejo MAC, the TO, BAT, and many other communities, so I'm very familiar with the whole area. I want to say that if you took the survey results out from the people in Newbury Park, you would have a very different story for Rancho Conejo, and I would like to see the city actually pull by area code what the people who actually live in those various zones for the areas of change, what they really truly want, not as a whole, because I feel pretty strongly we're being dumped on. Casa Conejo is now expected to have 4 or 5-story buildings in its backyard, and we're single family houses, and you are not protecting our area at all the same as you are protecting other things. Further, I think you ought to consider developing the more modern people-friendly village center stuff out by Kowloon and Moore Park College and places that have younger populations, and use the shopping centers off of Arbolace and Jan's and a lot of places that could really sustain development and spread the growth throughout the entire city, not just dump a bunch of it in Rancho Conejo. And you need to really sort out better what is commercial, what is retail, housing, the whole thing, and provide appropriate parking. We have the narrowest section of the 101 freeway out here. It doesn't widen until you start getting in a little bit looser place at Lynn. So we are really locked in. We have very little ingress and egress to our homes out here. And I think you need to really take a serious look at how you are doing this. And a lot of projects that have been approved in the last few years could very well have had some mixed use added into them on the north side of the freeway. The south side of the freeway is residential, grocery shopping, very homebound, and the north side is the more business-like center, but you could put that mixed use out there instead of building a lot of waste of space development out on the Rancho Conejo north side of the freeway.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. Diana, you are next.
Thank you. So I moved here to Thousand Oaks over 21 years ago, and I escaped Woodland Hills because I didn't like the build out there, the density, the congestion, and I wanted to come to a quiet community, and that's why I moved my family out here. So I'm really disappointed to see that we're talking about this congestion. What I am concerned about is I didn't see anything in the land use plans about how traffic's going to be accommodated. If you're talking about increasing another 40,000 more apartments,
yes,
and there's generally two cars per apartment, you're talking about 80,000 more cars on our streets. And are you going to widen Hillcrest, Thousand Oaks Boulevard, Moore Park Road? How are those streets that are currently 2 lanes each direction going to accommodate 80,000 more cars? I currently avoid Thousand Oaks Boulevard. I try to drive down Hillcrest and other streets to avoid the traffic on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. If you build out more multi-use and have 80,000 more cars on these roads, I didn't see how that was addressed in the general plan or this proposal, and that really concerns me.
Okay, thank you, Diana. Glenn.
Glenn, you're muted. If you can click the unmute button.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry. The last time I asked a question, it was because I was trying to get up to speed, and I'm still trying to get up to speed. And the one question I have, and this may we have to go somewhere else to get an answer to this. I just noticed that other than listing Skyworks as the 5th largest employer in Thousand Oaks and showing the location of Skyworks on a map, the general plan is completely silent on Skyworks and the semiconductor industry. Skyworks is one of the hottest companies on Wall Street right now. According to Yahoo Business, the stock price has gone up 80% in 2020. And Skyworks is sitting on, get this, $1 billion in cash. Now, Skyworks has locations worldwide, including the location in Thousand Oaks, which designs power amplifiers and manufactures semiconductors. If I remember the number right, the employment is about 700 jobs for highly skilled workers. And my question is, what is the rationale for the general plan omitting consideration of Skyworks and the semiconductor industry?
Okay, thank you, Glenn. We're not, at this point, not answering questions. We're doing public comment.
Okay.
If we have time, we can circle back and answer some questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Deb Gill.
yes. Hi, thank you. This plan is not a Thousand Oaks plan. It's a plan from people that are outside of Thousand Oaks. The reason that most of us live here and moved here, I moved from the San Fernando Valley, was to have the feeling of Thousand Oaks. We should be honored that so many people say we love our city and we don't want it to change. And we all know, I have children, I want my children to live here. We know we have to have housing, but we do not have to have these drastic Arcadian plans that are from a Sacramento-based plan that has nothing to do with what our life is and how we have planned our community. Please think about it. Please think about how we want to live, and we do not have to be directed by Sacramento. None of us want to be the Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Are there any other, is there anyone else from the public who wants to make a comment at this point? Steve, I see you raising your hand. Why don't you go ahead? If you can go ahead and unmute yourself before you start, that would be great.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Steve Caston. I own property on Teal Boulevard, and I'm a board member of TOBA, Thousand Oaks Business Association. However, I'm speaking on my behalf, not the organization. Been to many meetings, heard a lot of comments. And what strikes me mostly is people want Teal Boulevard to be a pedestrian-oriented street. So having said that, mixed use is very favorable to the people I've spoken to. We want to get people out of their cars, have maybe 1 or 2 parking structures. You know, it's a 3-mile area of Teal Boulevard, and have 1 or 2 parking structures. Have people walk, make it, which is the specific plan, have crosswalks, have trees, have lighting, have more entertainment areas, restaurants, places for people to go at night, so the street doesn't become, sidewalks roll up at night. So I'm so much for mixed use, and the people I've talked to, they're in agreement. The master plan works. We need more housing. How can people work in Thousand Oaks without housing? People I've talked to, they commute, Oxnard, Simi Valley, the Valley, West LA. So the specific plan for mixed use is, I'm all in favor, and the designs that I've seen, I mostly agree with them. I think the plan is
Steve,
working.
you're at 1.5 minutes now. If you could wrap it up, that'd be great. Thank you.
You have my support.
Thank you, Steve. I apologize, folks. I want to just maybe take a minute if there are no more folks who have not given a public comment at this point. There were some questions that I think it's worth just circling back with. So, one is, there was the question about how did people know about this? Actually, before I do that, Linda Carl, if you want to go ahead and give a comment. Linda?
I'm hoping that you can hear me now.
Oh, now we can, yes.
I did fill out a survey, and I also managed to have a couple of friends filled it out too. We did do it in paper, and I was the one that delivered them to the city, the city hall building. And we feel that the village centers are an attractive idea for the general plan. It allows the vision that in the future, there will be an opportunity for families to live and work here in Thousand Oaks. And it does benefit the city long term. Contrary to what many might think, low families who have a modest income, if they have the possibility to live here, they also have the possibility to spend their income here, leaving the money here for the city to benefit of that revenue. The businesses will benefit from it and will continue to flourish. And I do appreciate that there are differences of opinions. That's what makes the city an attractive city where we can all agree to disagree. But we do feel that if this city is going to continue to grow and flourish as it has until now, it does need to move and allow for
just over 1.5 minutes
can come and raise families like we have. This house that we live in was purchased in 1987. We are long-term residents. We do have children on in life.
Linda, I apologize. It's been 1.5 minutes. If you could finish up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize to everyone. We're trying to keep on time here. I want to just circle back to a couple of questions that that people had about where to find information and how the information got out there about the meeting. So, you know, as I had mentioned, if you go on the project website, which is toaks2045.org, you'll be able to see the surveys, the results of those surveys. You can sign up for updates. And there is a comprehensive list of all of the engagement activities that have happened over the last year and a half and how we reached out to community members. There was a question about traffic in the city, and yes, it is true that at this point we have not done an analysis of the traffic. The next task that we're going to do is identify the actual growth projections from an economic standpoint that we expect to happen between now and 2045, and that's when that traffic analysis will occur. You know, a lot of you had mentioned the idea of village centers, as I had mentioned in the, you know, I think people from the GPAC, members of the GPAC were also a little surprised that some of those didn't come to the surface more, and the comment that that Eric made, I think is a very good one, that you know, it's not a blanket designation on those areas. We need to be really site specific. Where it makes sense to have it, it could potentially occur, and we should look at that. But there are some areas where it might not make sense to allow mixed use or residential development in those shopping centers. And so I think having a really really close look at that would be important. Wendy, you asked a question about the information for and the survey results by zip code. You mentioned area code. I think you meant zip code. You know, I think that's something that when we're looking at the survey results, we can do a breakdown. The survey actually allows us to break it down by the zip code in the city, so people can see the results for people who lived in that area, in that zip code, for what they said about the question. So, and Wendy, maybe you can chime in if you think that's something that would be helpful to see. We can produce that information and put that up on the website. So, and that's some of the more refined analysis we can do. So I appreciate you looking at that and thinking about that. And we can also look at it by age as well. We can't, cut things lots of different ways. But, I think we can certainly do that by zip code if you'd find that helpful. So yes, you're nodding your head, yes. Okay. Yeah, so we'll do that, and we'll just give the raw results and make that available on the website. We can do that, and you can look at that. And then Roseanne, you brought up a really great question, which is how do we combine the numeric results with the comments that were made? And what we're going to do, and I agree with you in our quick look at that the directionality of the comments is potentially different than the directionality of the actual the survey responses in the multiple choice questions. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's not surprising that people who saw what they liked and saw the direction that they wanted are not as likely to select none of the above. I appreciate you saying that that you picked that because you wanted to describe things in detail. And so it was probably a mischaracterization that it meant that people didn't like it. But if I actually look at the results and the comments that people made, it was sort of overwhelmingly for people who clicked none of the above and then wrote a comment that they were mentioning that they didn't like any of the above comments. So we're going to go through those and try and identify the number of people who provided comments and then the general direction of those comments as well. It is not a layer that we've been able to get to at this point, but is going to be part of a more detailed, comprehensive report that we're going to prepare on the survey results to give that information and information, Wendy, like you had mentioned about geographic area and how that varies, I think is also interesting to think about. I actually had the same thought of that, of like, do people put, they want development in someone else's neighborhood and not their own neighborhood, and like, to what extent is that happening? So we were thinking about that as well. So I see you nodding your head again, that crossed your mind clearly also. So we're trying to kind of come up with and run these numbers and give some information, because our job here is to provide the information to the GPAC, to the community, and then to the city council, so the city council can make a decision with this. I am going to switch now. I'm going to switch back to my screen here, and share some of the upcoming events that we have, because there is a lot upcoming and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for continued discourse around this, around these conversations. So on Monday night, there is a Planning Commission meeting. We're going to give a similar presentation to the Planning Commission, probably a little bit more background on the general plan and maybe a little bit less on the survey. Hopefully that the Planning Commission has read the survey, and then there will be opportunities for public comment. So we're trying to get the Planning Commission's feedback as well on this. We are going to take the information from the survey, from the written comments, from the comments we heard this evening, from the GPAC, and then come up with sort of the next iteration of a preferred alternative by mid-April. And that's going to be released, we think, around April 16th. We're still working on the specifics of when that will be. If we can get it out earlier, we will. That is going to be accompanied by another online survey to get feedback. We don't yet know the exact format of that, but it's going to be a little bit more open-ended comments. And I think if there's areas that were in question from the survey, we're going to ask specific questions about that in the survey. Again, I think that the survey, this past survey, gave us some information on direction, but it didn't give us all of the answers. And so we're going to keep refining and trying to ask questions to understand a little bit more each time. And I think some of the questions that came up about development at the Oaks Mall might be a question that we want to ask in a little more detail. We're going to have another workshop in our next GPAC meeting, as well as a joint public workshop on April 21st to go over the land use alternatives. And then once we get those comments, and we are going to go to the Planning Commission on April 26th to present the preferred alternative. And then that will lead into the City Council meetings on May 18th and May 25th in order to get feedback from the City Council on the preferred direction. There are, as I said, that this is just for the land use alternatives, but there is a whole other continued process that's going to happen over the next year. And so this slide, which there's a detailed schedule that is posted now on the website defining the different steps and the opportunities for engagement. This shows the time frame, the work products that we're going to be doing, essentially the major work we're doing as part of the project, and then what the meetings that we're going to have, and so the opportunities for public input in these dark green boxes. And so if you'll see, April and May, we're going to be doing the preferred land use alternative the engagement's going to be the GPAC and public workshop, the online survey, and then the Planning Commission and City Council meetings. June through August, we're going to be developing some of the content for other topics. We're going to continue to have GPAC meetings, have public workshops, policy topics, specific discussions. We had a discussion on environmental justice and equity a few weeks ago. The environmental impact report is going to start, and that's where we're going to start looking at some of the impacts to like water and transportation. And then there's also going to be a Planning Commission meeting at this time. At this point, during this time, we're also going to move the draft housing element forward, since we have to meet state requirements. September through December, we're going to be working on really on the detail and preparing the draft plan. So we're essentially going to probably go a little bit dark in the time, so that our team has the opportunity to do some of the writing on the plan. Then in around January, we'll release the draft general plan and EIR, and that will lead into a whole series of other engagement meetings, GPAC meetings, Planning Commission, City Council, public workshops, in order to get feedback on the entirety of the plan, leading to review and adoption in March and April, so about a year from now. So as you can see, there's still lots of opportunity for engagement in the process. I'd like to thank everyone this evening for participating. I know it was a lot of information. We really appreciate throughout this process people's willingness to share their ideas and share their thoughts. We know that these are challenging topics. We know that it means a lot to people, the city and the neighborhood in which you're in, and that changes to that are something that strikes a deep chord within people. So we fully recognize that, and this is part of that the discourse, the community discourse, and the conversation about the general plan. So again, a reminder that that we are going to have the Planning Commission meeting on Monday night. We encourage folks to attend, and then leading into another survey. As always, feel free to send emails to through the website to city staff, and we'll do our best to respond to specific requests for information, and keep informed of what's on the website so that you know what's going on. And as always, please tell your friends and neighbors about this process so they're involved as well. Okay, with that, I think we're going to end this evening. Michael, anything from the city on this? Final comments?
No.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for being here tonight.
All right, thank you all. Please review the survey in more detail, and we can check in next time about more on the results and the preferred alternative. So with that, thank you all and have a good night.